Hello YouTube, Dave here again, and today I want to make a video that's sort of more of a personal thing. I hope I don't have to make or feel like I should make too many of these types of videos, because I don't want to be another one of those individuals that just, goes online and rants or raves or, appeals to the segment of, the YouTube audience or the internet audience in general that wants to see negativity. I try to keep things as positive as possible, and I hate getting negative. I'll explain kind of where I'm going with this in a moment, but it's just one of those things that, I try to stay as positive as possible because, I talk about hobbies. I talk about tabletop role-playing games. I talk about a collectible card game. How serious should I really take all this stuff? And so with that in mind, I want to talk about the biggest thing that I want to see happen when it comes to the role-playing community as a whole, not just the Dungeons & Dragons community, not just, the Pathfinder community. Overall, what I want to see amongst tabletop role players is just simply put unity. The fact of the matter is that as a hobbyist, the kind of hobby that I'm into, over the past few decades has been met with a lot of fear-mongering, with a lot of intolerance and ignorance from people who just don't understand anything about it, and a lot of stereotyping that has come from just being somebody who likes to play a tabletop role-playing game. And it can be really frustrating. Like back in the 80s, you had the religious panics of, oh, this game is Satanist. If you play this, you're going to worship the devil, and then you're going to end up committing suicide when your character dies, because that's how, involved into your character you really are. Now, none of that actually really ever happened. I don't think there was ever a single case of murder or suicide that was ever linked specifically to Dungeons & Dragons. In fact, a lot of cases where someone had committed suicide who had played Dungeons & Dragons in the past, a lot of times it was that regular D&D game that kept them going, and that's something that I can personally attest to, the power of just this hobby to kind of get you through the tough times. And it's usually stopping that caused these issues to happen. You went from the satanic panic to the, oh, you're a hardcore nerd and people should make fun of you, and it's one of those things that people would get harassed and even sometimes beat up because they played this this nerdy game. So for people who have played tabletop role-playing games, especially people who have played from like the 80s and 90s, even at the end of the 90s when I started playing, I still ended up catching some of this from family and people I was going to school with. So I think as a community as a whole, as anyone who's played a tabletop role-playing game, your hobby has something that people have had to defend from outsiders for a very long time. And I understand that, and I lived through that. Not the worst part of it, but I lived through that. The problem is that that need to defend has never really been turned off. Like, that switch has just never been flipped back the way that it should be, because nowadays tabletop role-playing has reached an all-time high level of acceptance. You've got actors like Vin Diesel coming out on late-night talk shows and just talking about how much he loves Dungeons & Dragons. You've got celebrities playing, Twitch games online, for Wizards of the Coast. You've got, it's just a huge part now of, modern society. Dungeons & Dragons has actually become something that's actually kind of cool. The issue is that you have some people that still feel as if they have to defend their version of the game, and that's okay, but they do it at the expense of people who like something different than them. And that's what I want to talk about today. So this is sort of a follow-up to a video I made a while back, which was just, the premise of the video was, let people play what they like. And that there's no wrong way to play, something like Dungeons & Dragons. There's no wrong answer when it comes to it, and there's no wrong choice when it comes to version or edition, alright? And that's something that I really, really want to stress. Because the comments that I keep seeing and the things that keep driving me up the wall is the comments of, oh, you liked 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Well, your opinion on D&D doesn't matter. And to me, that was just always such an ignorant statement to make that I just, I get blown away by it sometimes to see it. It's like, oh, your opinion doesn't matter. And it's like, well, why doesn't it matter? And no one ever responds to those comments when I fire back. And it's really kind of frustrating and irritating. It's childish and immature. So if you're the kind of person who doesn't like 4th edition, that's fine. You know, there's reasons not to like it. There are reasons to like it as well, and there are people that do. And because they like it, it doesn't make them wrong. It's a hobby. You know, it's something that is a personalized thing. So if you like 4th edition, you're not wrong, okay? And your opinion on Dungeons & Dragons as a whole is still perfectly valid compared to somebody who is a fan of 3.5 Dungeons & Dragons, or 1st edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, or 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, or the D&D Basic Expert Rules, or 0 edition, or 5th edition. It doesn't matter what version of the game you play. And if you're the kind of person that feels so, I want to say insecure, really, honestly, about which version of the game you like, that you have to go and bash other people simply because they enjoyed another version of the game that you disagree with, doesn't make them wrong, and it doesn't make you better than them. And that's a thing that really, really needs to stop. So, you know, honestly, just get over it, okay? 4th edition had a lot of good stuff going for it. It was not marketed well, and I definitely agree with that. Wizards of the Coast kind of went too far and really pushed all the things that would turn people away from it, traditionalist, you know, gamers, rather than saying, well, these are the things that, you know, we did and this is why. You know, for example, changing the spell system. You know, it was a huge controversial thing. But the reasons that they did it, you know, I mean, they formatted it in a way that was more closely resembling things like MMORPGs, which was, at the time, something that was threatening the survival of tabletop role-playing games. And I don't think people really necessarily understand that, you know, the significance of that. I mean, there were columns in Dragon Magazine and Dungeon Magazine speculating about the future of the hobby. There were conversations in my local gaming store on a near weekly basis as World of Warcraft started creeping up and up and up and getting, you know, over 14 million monthly paid subscribers. And, you know, those MMOs, they do all the math for you. And that was something that a friend of mine pointed out that I forgot to mention in my 4th edition retrospective, is it simplifies everything and it does everything for you so you can just enjoy the gaming experience. And there was a time where that felt like it was going to be the end of the tabletop role-playing genre, or was going to be something that would cause it to collapse in on itself and really only be able to be this little niche market thing. So there were a lot of concerns about it. So yeah, they made the decision to do that. But they also made some changes that I personally liked. For example, when it came to changing the spell system, the thing that I liked is that you got your spells at the same level as what they were now named. So for anyone who played traditional D&D, you would know that a wizard would get Fireball as a 3rd level spell slot at 5th level. And that's the way it had been since basically, I think, 1st edition and probably even beyond to the basic expert rules. You know, Fireball was always a 3rd level spell, and you were 5th level when you got it. The problem is, for people who are new to the hobby, there's confusion as to why your character can be 20th level and your spells only go up to 9th, and why you're not getting a new spell level when you level as a character. So the change was made. Fireball became a 5th level ability. You got it at the exact same time of your normal progression that you would typically get it for any other version of the game, but they just dropped that. And to me, I like that. I thought that was great. I like that they balanced the classes so that all the classes played in a similar manner, to the point where you actually felt encouraged to try something different. And that's something that I don't think any of the previous editions really captured all that well. I tried playing a rogue in 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons. I tried playing wizards in 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. And I always just never really felt comfortable playing them. I always ended up going back to playing a fighter type, because they were easy to understand and play. You know, with the rogue, you know, trying to find where the DM would hide the traps could sometimes be a chore, especially if the DM would start getting creative with their trap placement, and instead of putting it, say, on a pedestal where you'd expect it, it would be like 3 steps in front of the pedestal all the way around, or just something that would be sort of difficult to think of. But when it came to 4th edition, if you knew how to play one class, you had a basic idea of how to, you know, use the abilities of all the classes. And for me, that was a great thing. I enjoyed that. I liked that a lot. Now, when I first started, or when 4th edition was first announced, I was like a lot of other people. I didn't like it. I didn't like the way they were marketing it. I didn't like the changes that they were making. I didn't want anything to do with it. I was not going to be the kind of person, though, that would go on and bash somebody who liked 4th edition simply because I didn't. So that's the important distinction there, is that even though I didn't like it, I wasn't going to judge somebody else who did, because that's silly. Alright? It's ridiculous, and it's something that just, there's no need for it in the hobby. What changed for me is that my mother actually bought me the Player's Handbook, and I've told this story a few times. So I got the Player's Handbook for Christmas of 2008, which is the same year that 4th edition came out, and for a couple of years that book sat by itself on my shelf. I started to build my 3rd edition collection around it, or finishing my 3rd edition collection for the books that I wanted to get. I had my 2nd edition AD&D books, and I had my 1st edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons books at this point, and I was starting to get them. I had at least the core books at this point in time. So it just kind of started to bother me. It's like, I should at least get the core books, if nothing else. And then D&D Essentials came out, and I had run 4th edition for so long, or 3rd edition I should say, for so long. I ran 3rd edition from 2000, and it was getting into 2012 at this point, and I was just finishing up my last 3rd edition campaign, and I was tired of 3rd edition. I wanted something different, and 4th edition and D&D Essentials was sitting right there, and I started flipping through it, and I liked a lot of what I saw. And to be honest, a lot of people that make these comments of, oh, your opinion doesn't matter because 4th edition, you know, sucks, and anyone who plays 4th edition isn't a true D&D, you know, gamer. You know, I've got, you know, pretty extensive collection. I have experience with every version of the D&D game, which a lot of these people that make these kinds of comments don't. And that's the other key important thing. You know, if my opinion doesn't matter, I've got a pretty extensive experience with the hobby. I own everything for 0 edition. I haven't played it, I haven't run it, but I have everything for it. I've played 1st edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. I've played and run every version of D&D from 2nd edition AD&D on. So 2nd edition, 3.0, 3.5, 4th edition, Essentials, and 5th edition. I have experience with 40 years worth of Dungeons & Dragons history. So you know what? My opinion does matter. It doesn't have to match yours, and you know, yours doesn't have to match mine, and that's fine. You know, there's always room for debate, and you can always talk about things like, you know, you have people say, I don't like 4th edition. I never liked 4th edition. I didn't like the ideas behind it. Instead of just leaving it at, so you did and you suck and I hate you, which is things that you see, instead of being like that, just say, you know, I didn't like 4th edition, I didn't like the idea behind it. Why did you play it? Like, why did you like it? So a lot of the arguments that people have made over the years, the most common ones, don't actually have their roots in 4th edition. And it was funny because I made, in my 4th edition post-mortem, I talked about that, and I kind of, like, these are some of the key reasons that a lot of people bring up as to why they don't like 4th edition. And a lot of them had their roots in 3rd edition. You know, it's like, oh, it killed role-playing games because you could just make a skill check. It's like, well, 3rd edition started that. You know, 3rd edition had Persuasion, it had Intimidate, and they were just straight rolls. And there are people that would, in 3rd edition games, would just say, well, I make an Intimidate check. It's like, well, what do you say? It's like, it doesn't matter, I rolled a 17 on the dice, so I get like 22 total. So it doesn't matter, they're intimidated. That started in the 3rd edition. And what was funny to me is, when I made these points, a lot of people are like, well, you know, that's true, I never really thought of it, you know, quite like that. But there was one person in particular that's like, well, it's not fair for you to call out 3rd edition, you know, for these things. You know, it's not fair to do that. And it's like, well, then why is it fair to call 4th edition out for these same things, even though they started in this other edition? And again, I never got an answer back. So that's just someone who, again, just, you know, and they weren't as bad about it because, again, they weren't, I wouldn't consider them to have been ignorant in their comment. I think they were misguided, you know, saying that it's not fair to call out a earlier version of a game while you're, you know, having negative views and you know, of the one that came after it. It's totally fair. It's totally valid, and there's a reason why the things that are in 4th edition that people didn't like are there. And some of those things had their roots in 3rd edition, and 3rd edition needs to be called out for it. People need to understand that. And when you look at 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, which is one of the most universally praised versions of the game to have ever been released. You know, it's the version of the game that brought D&D fully into mainstream. It's the one that, you know, is probably the most successful of the versions of D&D to ever hit the shelves. A lot of their mechanics and a lot of their ideas come from 4th edition. There is more of a 4th edition influence on D&D 5th edition than there is 3rd edition. For example, just a couple of things, and then I'm going to end the video because I don't want it to go on too long. For anyone who likes the archetypes in 5th edition, those started as Paragon Paths in 4th edition. And I know people have said, well, it's like the idea of prestige classes, but they're not. Prestige classes were altogether separate, and you would typically have to have multi-classed in order to qualify for them. They were altogether separate, and you would give up abilities in one class to take this prestige class. Paragon Path, starting with 4th edition, which ran from levels 11 through 20, had features that were complementary to the ones that you would get for your base class, and they were integrated into the base class, as archetypes are in 5th edition. Archetypes are the same thing, the same concept, and the same execution as Paragon Paths. You just get them significantly earlier than you would with the Paragon Paths. The other thing is, when it comes to you know, the 4th edition influence, anytime you have an ability that you can reuse after a short rest or a long rest, that has its roots in the encounter powers from D&D 4th edition. So things like the fighter's, what's it called, Second Wind, that they get, where they can heal a D10 plus their level and hit points. Or their Action Surge. You know, the Action Surge is a daily ability, because you have to take a long rest to get it back. The Second Wind is an encounter ability, because you get it back after a short rest. Now, they made it so that you're not getting it after every single encounter, so it's not, you know, strictly an encounter power, but it's built on the same premise as encounter powers were. So you get them back after a short rest. They just changed what a short rest had to be, so it's not something you're going to do after every single fight. So again, 4th edition is a major part of D&D's history, and without 4th edition, we wouldn't have the 5th edition that we have here today. The response to 4th edition, which was negative, did force Wizards of the Coast to look at the way they handled things going forward. And it really did. You know, they looked at other companies that did the, you know, like Paizo Publishing. With Pathfinder, they did an open playtest, and the results kind of spoke for themselves. Looking at the success of that, looking at the critical failure of 4th edition from a financial standpoint, they changed their philosophy. Instead of pumping out supplement after supplement after supplement and just bloating the game with unnecessary resources, which they did with 4th edition and 3rd edition, which they really did with 3rd edition, it kind of got to the point where they realized that they can't do that anymore. And 4th edition played a significant role in that. So when I said in an earlier video that I considered 4th edition to be one of the most important versions of D&D to ever be made, I'm not saying it was the most important. The most important, in my opinion, is 0th edition, because that started everything. You know, and then 1st edition and Basic, because they popularized everything. And then 3rd edition, because it revitalized everything. But 4th edition changed the way Wizards of the Coast approached D&D for the future. And it has to be recognized for that. So here's the thing. In conclusion, the last thing that I want to state, you don't have to like 4th edition. Okay? You don't. And I don't think I'm going to ever change anybody's opinion. I would stress, or I would ask, that if you're going to just irrationally hate on it, at least try a game of it. You know, get a group together, try an adventure, you know, try a session. But D&D has to stop being about the rule sets and, you know, despising other people because of the difference in opinion and rule sets. When we sit down and tell stories about our D&D experiences, or our role-playing experiences in general, what do we tend to talk about? Do we talk about the mechanics of it? Do we talk about, you know, oh man, you know, THAC0 was so, you know, awesome, and I just love THAC0, and, you know, I'm gonna spend all my time talking about how I calculated this person's armor class, you know, so I knew if I hit them or not? Or do you just tell the story about what happened in the adventure? Do you tell the story about the time that your player characters, infiltrated an enemy stronghold and the things that they did while they were in there and how they barely managed to get out? Or the time that, you snuck up on an orc camp and, was able to sow, chaos into it? Or, the time that, you basically had, the goblin, this goblin wolf rider, this really intimidating, kind of looking goblin, die in a single one shot because you ended up getting an awesome crit on them. Are you going to talk about that stuff, or are you going to talk about the mechanics of the game? Are you going to sit there and discuss the calculations that went into it, or the mechanics that made those calculations possible? No. You're going to tell the stories. And for me, that's all you should ever talk about when you're talking about Dungeons and Dragons with other people. Even if they don't like your edition, just sit down and tell your stories, because the things that they did was just as fun to them as what you did is to you. And it doesn't matter what rule set was used to get there. The experience of getting together with your friends, having a good time, is all that should matter. So, I know there's going to be people that are going to comment negatively on this video, and there are people that are going to, say, well, 4th edition sucks and your opinion doesn't matter. And I get that. The thing is that, if you're the kind of person that does that, just stop for a moment and really think to yourself, what's the point of doing all this? What am I going to accomplish by putting this comment on there? Most of them go ignored completely. Others get, are you just trying to elicit a reaction? Because honestly, when it comes to those types of comments, I've already made the decision that I'm just not going to respond to them anymore, because they're just too, again, small and ignorant for me to even consider anymore. And I'm tired of getting irritated by seeing them. So if you're the kind of person that wants to leave those messages in the comments, and if you're the kind of person that's going to discriminate against other people because they enjoy something that, that you don't, which, by the way, is causing no harm to you, my enjoyment of 4th edition for, the short period of time that I played it does not impact your enjoyment of your current edition of Dungeons & Dragons, whichever it may be. My enjoyment of something is not going to negatively impact your life, just like your enjoyment of something is not going to negatively impact my life. There are people who still think 3.5 D&D is the best version ever. I'm kind of burnt out on 3rd edition. I never want to run 3rd edition ever again. I would play it, absolutely, but I would never run it. So the people that are, these hardcore loyalists to 3.5 and say, well, this is the best version ever, and I love damage reduction, and I love spell resistance, I love all those mechanics, I don't agree with them. But the fact that they like that doesn't impact me at all. So I don't really bother with it. I don't say anything, because it's not worth it. And it's not worth it to tell people that their opinions don't matter just because they disagree with you. And if you're that kind of person, honestly, I really don't want you watching my videos. Simple as that. Do you have to like what I do? No. Do you have to agree with me? Absolutely not. And if you want to say things like, well, these are the issues that I kind of had with 4th edition, and this is why I didn't really care for it, that's fine. That's totally fine. I get that. You didn't like the power structures. That's cool. I totally understand that. It's a perfectly valid reason. That's great. You could even have what I consider to be less valid reasons to specifically hate 4th edition. And that's, again, fine, because that's your thing, and that's not going to change my opinion of how I feel about that particular version of the game. And there's no point in me trying to arbitrarily want to try to change your opinion, because, again, what's the point? You like something, you like it. You don't like it, you don't. That's fine. You can even say, again, like I said, you can even say, I don't really care for this edition of the game. Never really appealed to me, but, it's cool that you liked it, or, whatever, right? Just, you can even say, like, this is why. This is why I didn't care for it. And that's, again, that's fine. That's valid. That's something that can actually be the basis of a conversation. And that's great, because we should be talking about D&D. But again, my major thing is I just want to tell the stories. I just want to talk about the events that happened and not the rules that got us there. So anyway, I rambled on for quite a while, but it's something that I really need to get off my chest, because it's just something that's been bothering me and bothering me and bothering me. So anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope, you enjoyed the video, and, hopefully, again, if you're the kind of person who would just say something like that and not necessarily out of malice, maybe it'll get you to think twice before you do it again, because, again, you may not be meaning to sound, ignorant or intolerant. It just really comes across that way, especially in print. Anyway, thank you guys again, Hope you enjoyed, and I promise you the next video will be a lot more, lighthearted and easygoing. Until then, take care.